we're all forgetting about the most important victims of the AI future.
Shareholders.
Which is people with an atypical number of fingers. Because nobody will ever believe their true life actually happened because they have 6 fingers, you know?
Yep.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 435 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is September 29th, 20 Jubilee. And before we get started, profanity warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. Warning. Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose money we routinely grab, stuff it into our microphones, and then burn it to keep the microphones nice and toasty for recording. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right, so we got lots of stuff going on this week in kind of the industry, as we like to say, in the games space. All right, so guess you can just get right into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So first off, the past, couple episodes, we've talked about Unity, the formerly popular game engine that, dare I say, a majority of small studios, of independent studios, and even some large studios use to produce their games, ranging from PlayStation, Xbox, big titles, small mobile games, big mobile games, you name it.
The whole gamut.
Somebody's made it in Unity. Okay. So they've had this debacle these past few weeks where they announced this horrifying decision to essentially unilaterally bankrupt all of these studios, who then said, please don't. And after about a week and a half of silence, Unity turned around and said, fine. They changed their model. So now instead of an arbitrarily enormous financial burden on all these studios, it's now going to be either that or a 2.5% revenue share, whichever is smaller, which will always be the 2.5% revenue share.
Well, unless you have a game that's a premium title with no free demos, et cetera,
and no pirates.
As long as piracy is something that you get to not count somehow, then in principle, it could actually be a lot less to go with that 20 cent per install deal, right?
Yeah,
but it all depends on the details of how you're allowed to calculate, because also they switched it to now it's going to be definitely just self-reporting. So
self-reported revenue and installs.
Yeah, so they're going to give some kind of guidance, which has not yet been given, at least last time I saw, of how you count those installs, right? And so that's then, because they have to have some way to audit it too, right? My bet is what they will end up doing is they'll have you use whatever the stores that you sell in report as those numbers of installs, and they'll just use that number because that's the one that they know they can get. And it doesn't make sense for anything besides just selling games outright, or at least distributing games outright. So it doesn't make sense for subscription services. If you're in some sub services and that kind of stuff, you're basically going to 2.5%.
Yeah, I think in just about every scenario you're going to 2.5%. Even in the selling a super expensive premium game, like the fact is, if you're selling a game for $60, right? Well, 1% of that is 60 cents, right? So 2.5% is going to be like $2 ish, basically, right? Per copy that you sell. But of course, like you're going to have, especially for a high priced premium game, you're going to have way more pirates than a cheaper game.
Yeah, but again,
right?
I don't think the piracy thing matters though if they calculate it using store metrics.
Yeah, well, that's basically the essence of this whole backtracking that Unity has done, which is they've removed everything that they asserted they were going to do at the beginning, and they've landed in a space where it doesn't even make sense that they're still hanging on to this idea of installs, because that's just not actually what it's going to be counted, and it's just going to end up being a revenue share. Essentially,
it's just a revenue share with extra steps.
It's just a revenue share that's very convoluted for some reason. So I really liked. I think it was Rami Ismail who tweeted a pretty good encapsulation of what this means now, which is that what did he say? Something like this change that Unity has announced is great for developers because it gives us enough breathing room and time to switch to a different engine. Because
that was
the
the dream
trust
the whole time, right? Like, can we just get enough time to know that no people are going to be absolutely destroyed in a way that is not,
Yeah. Well, and the most important change they made, though, is that they made it not retroactive, which I still don't believe they legally could have done anyway. I'm just not convinced that that's possible.
Yeah, they might have been able to do that in some countries, because it is an international business, right? Like they have customers all over the world and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, if there was any country you could do it in, it would be the United States because we have, the least consumer protections of basically anywhere. But even here, I don't think they could have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
I don't
think.
think.
And they asserted that their terms and conditions are dictated by the laws of the state of California, which, I would think this kind of thing would not be legal, I think, in California.
It's the closest to the EU that the states has at this point.
Yeah. So, I think at the end of the day, it's good that they, reverted this horrifying move that they were about to do. But, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? Like it's over. Like the trust is gone. If you go to like the Unity subreddit, you've got just a lot of people coming in being like, hey, I'm thinking about picking up Unity and learning. And people are just like, don't. Like you get the entire Unity community just telling people not to use the engine. And a lot of the conversations in there are now people comparing notes on how to transition away from Unity, right? Like it's almost like a support group now of like people grieving and helping each other cope. Right.
Which again, it's so weird because if they just wanted to get more money, they could have just been like, we want a 2.5% royalty, and no one would have fled because that's fine. Annoying,
that's a fine thing to do.
Sure.
The problem is that if the decision that they did make and announced, if that way of thinking and that way of making decisions can somehow make it through their organization and then get publicly announced to developers, this is a broken company that has no understanding of their position in the industry and who their customers are and just any of this stuff.
And any understanding they do have is met with indifference, right? So like they don't care that everyone's livelihoods depend on this thing and so on and so forth, right? So even if they do understand, which I would agree, it seems like they don't, but even if they do.
Yeah, either they don't understand or they don't care. And both are
bad.
Not good.
Both are not good. Like it's not good to pin your entire existence as a studio, as a professional or whatever on a company that has either of those attitudes towards you, right? Like it's just not good, feels bad. And so people are, it's, I don't know. I feel like it's just on the way out now, right?
Ship is sailed.
It is still difficult to find something comparable. So we did talk about like a lot of people are going to Godot for maybe smaller game projects, which, can't really do console stuff at this point. I think, it's open source. So you could do all the console porting and SDK integration yourself.
Yeah. I think the core problem is that you can't integrate with consoles in an open source way because
of licensing.
Because of licensing for all the SDKs and docs and stuff from like the number of hoops that we jumped through to like get into the Nintendo ecosystem so that we could put our games on Switch and stuff, right? Is just it's enormous and everything's locked under NDA and so on, right? So even though like we even had to get through the process of like even once we were putting a game on Switch, and even though our game engine, Game Maker, had a Switch port, there was this moment in time where we still had to like coordinate so that everybody knew we were allowed to talk to each other about Switch stuff.
Yeah, because the way that all the consoles work is like everything about their tech is proprietary and under like contractual NDAs, right? And so like they're not just going to publish everything about their SDKs and everything else as an open source thing for any developer to like make a Switch game or make an Xbox game.
But it also means that you can't contribute to Godot. Oh, here's like the Switch module that lets you export to Switch, right? Because the only way you could do it would be if you revealed proprietary secrets that you're under NDA for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
so
to me,
I'm
this
sure
is
there
just
are people who've worked on Godot games who do have the console port capabilities, but the point is
that was expensive.
Yeah, but it's not going to be available broadly. It cannot be available broadly.
Yeah.
You'd have to find those people and do probably hire them for stuff or whatever.
And
Yeah,
then not
which to me,
tell
this is
anybody.
and this is also just one of those kind of short-sighted things, in my opinion. Like much like Unity's pricing decision, in terms of like it being short-sighted. This idea that we want really good games for our platform, for our console or whatever, but for anybody to even begin to develop a game for our platform and understand what is required, we already have to have a legal arrangement with them. Right. And there's no open source. There's no extra contributors to it. This is all totally locked down. And it just means that like it makes it very anti-competitive in all these different ways, whether it's like on the engine side or the developer side or whatever.
Well, it's also anti-developer because the cost to you to then get on that platform is just enormous because you can't share resources with other teams.
Yeah, and nobody wins. Like even the company who has the proprietary info that they're locking down, like they now are 100% responsible for every aspect of it, and they incur tons of costs trying to manage all the legal and administrative stuff of keeping track of who can have access and who doesn't and who's allowed it.
Well, and in the end, they still control like what games end up on the platform, which is
they still own the platform.
That actually matters. It is so bizarre to me.
It's a little weird. Yeah.
It's just a historical momentum thing, right? Like that's how it was in the like this is how Nintendo won the console wars in the 80s. Is through just extremely aggressive legal and technological lockdowns and exclusions, right?
Yeah, and it is like it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, if you let that stuff go out.
Yeah, that's
but the fact is, though, the moment anybody has accessed it, it's actually available in the public now, just not legally, right? Like. But behind the scenes, like what we know is going on is that people who separately have agreements for like a given platform, then like talk to each other in good faith, even though they're not supposed to because they don't have proof that they each have an NDA, and stuff, right? To get a hold of shared resources and stuff, right? And we know this stuff leaks. Like I would bet you anything, every version of the Switch SDK, you could just go find it on the internet without a shot.
People sideload stuff onto the Switch. Like it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
people hack. It's all
a
a fiction.
pointless exercise that just makes that then when you're trying to do things the right way, right? Or trying to do stuff in a more collaborative way, like have an open source game engine that everybody can just make stuff on the Switch for. It just makes that basically impossible because projects then that actually are visible can't do that. They can't participate in this, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know from our own stuff too. Like it's just easier to have stuff be in like open in the public, right? Like the amount of stuff you have to do to keep things private is it's so much harder than just because we have some proprietary tech like Rumpus, right? But it's proprietary not because we don't want people to steal it, but because like if people know too much about how it works, we worry about people breaking.
It's security.
Yeah, it's a security
stability, right?
Yeah. But if it was the case though that we had some kind of a program where like thousands of other people could get access to that information, we would just open source it because at that point we lose the security benefits of locking it down. Like it just wouldn't happen.
Well, and we've got that with things like Stitch.
Yeah. Right? Well, there's the reason that I put Stitch out in the open was because it's just less of a pain in the ass to deal with. If I can put it on GitHub and I can and I can use all of their infrastructure that works really well for public repos, and it's free, by the way, so it's also cheaper to do it and leverage other people's infrastructure for things. And then you also get feedback from the community in a public way, so that your support costs go down because everybody can see each other's reports. Like everything just gets easier, but also harder because like now you're dealing with the masses, right? Which can be pretty challenging, especially if you're operating at the scale of Nintendo. So they're like, it's not to say that open source is easy because it's not.
Well, the reality is the benefit of keeping things closed is the benefit of keeping them closed, which is like it's private. You're supposed to, you have it all for yourself, and everybody else has to do a bunch of work for you.
Well, it's the monkey's paw. It's like you can control all the flow of information in and out, but also you have to. Yeah. Right?
and the moment and this is the thing that's again just so dumb to me is the moment. Like with these SDKs and the docs for these SDKs and stuff, tens of thousands of people that are not Nintendo have access to them.
Oh yeah, of course.
Tens of
how
thousands.
It's like how the summer sales would always leak before they finally made it public.
Yeah.
All their sales public, like last year, right? Because it was like,
there's too many
so
people.
many devs. Yeah, there's so many devs, and you could become a dev with $100. So it's like there is no.
Well, and the incentive is
no real-
the incentive to keep it private is zero, right? The
Yeah,
ability to track whether or not somebody's released it is zero, right? So like the net effect of all of it is it's just a charade that wastes everybody's time.
Yeah.
you know?
So which is all to say that like what makes Unity sticky as an engine is that, they do have deals with basically Unity plays the middleman. So they will have deals with all these different consoles where they have legal access to these SDKs and stuff. And then Unity will have to coordinate with each developer or each studio who claims to have a contractual arrangement with one of these consoles to be able to get access to the SDK, right? So Unity basically will like vet that and then like pass it on to them, right?
Well, because
So
they
it's this
don't,
very
unless
kind of
do they have an
controlled-
agreement where they can actually deliver the SDKs? Because like I know for
It's- I don't know.
GameMaker we have to get the SDK because like basically the evidence that we can use it is the fact that we got a hold of the SDK, sort of, right?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two parts to it, right? Like we need the SDK to be able to work on things, and then also like there's a runtime and porting component that the engine like there's kind of these different layers to it, but ultimately it comes down to like it's not just like the engine maker and the developer. It's like the console also is involved in this whole process from like a legal and administrative standpoint. And so if that changed, then something like Godot would just easily be able to take over, right?
Yeah.
Because like people would trust an open source project better, and if it can do all the things, then
Yeah, well, and I
just
think
use
like,
that,
as we've said in the past, like I think the most important choice, honestly, in a game engine is your ability to access platforms with the game that you make with it. I think that's more important than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like if you're like the
that
majority of
establishes your
devs,
market.
if you're like the majority of devs who are targeting one of the more open platforms, so either mobile or Steam, like it's still just the vast majority of games is one of those two. Then you don't need to worry about it. So it's also that big piece, right? Which is like, as much as it's the case that Unity has this essentially the console tie-in that Godot doesn't. That's not really relevant for most devs.
Well, and I think
like,
I agree with that, and I'll also say that because consoles are so like locked down, and they also are just like they're so quintessentially gaming, I think being able to put a game on a console is more. Now this is a hot take, but I think it's more more of a vanity project than an actually sound business move.
I'm with
unless you're a AAA or got an exclusive.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Unless you already have, because the fact is that none of the consoles do a good job with indie titles.
Yes.
At various points in time, any one console has like had a decent kind of little indie movement for a couple years or at a time or whatever, right? Where
So you'd have like Celeste on the Switch or something like that.
yeah, exactly. So, and you'll see some of these now and then, but on the whole, the only platforms you can successfully sell any titles on, like historically and continuously, are Steam and mobile. And mobile's very challenging, right? But
and I think
selling on mobile is a challenge, but
yeah. Well, and a big part of that is the concept of like first party titles and exclusives, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yep.
If these platforms,
It's all about discovery mechanisms.
yeah, if these platforms have specific studios or games that they themselves are funneling a bunch of money into as an investment to bring people to, so think about like God of War on PlayStation, right? Like that's a Sony studio. And they're making God of War games for PlayStation and for nothing else, right? Like they're viewing that as a console selling title. So if you release your indie game and then Sony has to decide, do we show, Jerry's fun puzzle box game or this other game that we spent $200 million promoting and developing, they're going to promote their own game that they put their own money into 10 times out of 10, right?
Yeah,
but,
and it's not
mobile
to say,
doesn't have that.
Yeah, it's not to say there's a reasonable chance you can more than break even on like the costs of getting your game on the platform.
yeah, certainly. If it's a
You
successful game, it can be successful there.
It can be successful. But because it's so expensive in your time and in the tech and everything, to get onto those platforms, it very quickly eats away at any kind of ROI you can get. And because the tail at least in our experience and from everything we've seen for indies, the tail on consoles just actually goes to zero, right? On like Steam, there's a tail there. Like it's low compared to your launch, right? But there's a tail there because they have discovery on the store, right? On Google Play,
Mobile's the same. Actually,
there's a tail there. Yeah, on iOS, the tail is good if you have a game that they've really promoted over the years. If you don't, then it also goes to zero because also they don't have as good of discovery on that platform.
It's less algorithmic discovery going on over there.
And so you can like break even, right? But you can't really use it as a way to like keep your studio, because like breaking even just means you're on a treadmill. You just like got back out exactly what you put in. You can't do a next thing. You didn't make enough money to do that, right?
But of course, long term, the more platforms you're on, the higher your maintenance costs are, and especially consoles because of all the extra layers of certification that you go through. And so it's, even if you do break even, you're actually worse off in the long run, you know?
I think the history of our experience with this is telling, which is that we went from being like, oh, we need to be on everything, which was our whole shtick for years, right? We need to be on everything because that way you get little bits of money coming from everywhere, which is true. You oftentimes will get little bits of money.
Very, very little bits. Super tiny bits of money.
Sometimes so little you kind of just have to laugh.
Yeah, sometimes you get a monthly statement and you're like, I'm going to go buy a pack of gum with that.
Sandwich money. We talk about sandwich money a lot in like the very early days.
Not in this economy.
Not in this economy, yeah. Sandwich money is like, oh man.
Sandwich money is $40 now.
Yeah. So I think that the reality is where we moved to is that you should be on as few things or as viable, which frankly is where we should have started. But, you know, it's one of those.
But you should be able, and I think that's the crux, right? Is you should be able to be on as many things as possible, because as the market around us moves, you never know when like the next, PlayStation's now like they've got an indie program or they're throwing money at indies because of some reason or whatever, right? You want to be agile to be able to.
If a project takes 4 years to make,
that's exactly it. It takes so long to make games that the industry shifts around us while we're doing it, and we have to be ready to take advantage of whatever the current market status is. And the reality is that between PC and mobile and the consoles, every year something has shifted about their business approach, how they're fighting each other, what they're doing for the indie scene, and so on. And that doesn't mean like you need to have an operational, PlayStation version like right now, right? But it does mean that
know if it works with a controller.
Yeah, exactly. And so we focus on form factor, which is to say we make sure our games work with touch and with keyboard and mouse and with a controller, right? Because that means we've covered at least the game itself. It's now a technical challenge: is how do we get it on the platform, right?
Yeah.
But it also means that if we choose a game engine that is going to be extremely expensive or extremely difficult to get onto a given platform, then that raises the bar dramatically for what has to be true about the market for you to be able to be successful there. But having said all of that, I'm taking all this stuff together, though, at least with the current market situation, it doesn't actually matter, I think, that it's a pain in the ass to get onto consoles from Godot, because I think it wouldn't be a good use of your dev time anyway. In most cases, that's not universally true, right? But in the vast majority of cases, I think that's actually
well. And if you're the scenarios where it's probably worth it to go to console are either like your game has already done super well on other platforms, right? And you've got like a big demand for it. Even in those cases, it may not pan out, but that can help. And the other scenario is that the console itself is offering you some kind of upfront money to bring your game onto some service that they have or whatever. And in those cases, you can negotiate through the porting costs and stuff. And like those are very common kinds of conversations. And so like, you could justify it that way. Like, cause if you had to develop your own way of porting your game in Godot, right, to be able to run it on Switch or something like that. And if you were actually in talks with Nintendo about it, then that would just be part of the conversation, and they might be able to help you. Right?
It does bring it back, though, to why all this is so dumb, because if all of this stuff was just open so that...
Then you would be fine.
Yeah, because then you would be fine. And but the amount of... And this is like one of the things that frustrates me the most about... And this is true in all industries, but I know I probably mentioned the podcast before, but one of my things that makes me irate the more I think about it is what Internet Explorer and the older days, what they did to the web industry because of how much of people's time was wasted.
Making everybody work so that you can protect some small piece of your company that in the long scale,
because
long term is questionably useful. Anyways.
Yeah, well, they had a shitty browser is the truth of it, right? And that didn't support web standards. And so most of like every web developer in the 2000s to early 2010s, 30% of their job was basically like trying to make things work on Internet Explorer, right?
Well, you had to do everything twice.
Like you do everything twice. So
working,
imagine
and then getting it working on Internet Explorer.
Yeah, you just do so 30% of all of web developer time, right?
Just got deleted
for a
by Microsoft.
decade. Was just thrown away for no fucking reason, right? And
well, no, again, for a very good reason for Microsoft, which is that
money.
They didn't want to put any energy into it, and they already had full market.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's it. Yeah, it's they chose to waste this enormous amount of human time. Right?
That's the thing that always gets me with the consoles, and I think the caution that I have for indies, especially those who played a lot of games growing up and are huge Nintendo fans, Nintendo in particular, is that it is true that, it's cool to have your game on something like a Nintendo product, right? Like the Switch, whatever else.
But they do not care how much of your time.
Man, they don't care.
They
So
consume.
it's like, I don't know how to put it, but it's like, if you could still do it, just be very clear that like you're potentially just doing it because it's cool for you.
Yeah, and even if it is like, again, even if it does actually make financial sense to do it, if it just was something that you could just do because it was all up to, then you wouldn't have this whole extra like, okay, well, we can spend an extra 3 months, right? Because sure, in the end, you might more than break even doing that potentially. I think in most cases today you wouldn't. But then what could you have done instead if it just already worked? If you didn't have to, you know?
Yeah, you could actually add more features to your game, polish it,
or make a new
debug, do some QA, start working on the next game,
add a DLC, whatever, right? Like there's so many things you could have done to set it. It's just a waste of time. And
it just is.
Yeah, that's the part that makes me just.
It's a million people independently solving the exact same problem over and over and over again in isolation. It's just
especially
on behalf of a company,
who's
not
that doesn't care about
about the fact.
Well, yeah, it's this whole idea of like the tax, right, and the regressive tax that you pay as a small game studio, right, because when you go to the stores, they still take their 30% cut. Although on mobile now it's 15% for your first million.
And on Steam, it goes down as you make more money.
On Steam,
I don't understand
the hilariously.
It's literally regressive in terms of like the way you would describe a tax policy, right? It's like charge people making less money more money, and then as they make more money, charge them less money.
Yeah, but that's the thing is when you're a small studio, then like because like 30% makes a big difference no matter how big you are, right? But when you're a small studio, it's whether or not you survive, right? When you're a big studio, it's how many people you have on staff and still when games come out and how many games you make. That's all still true, right? But the studio gets to keep going, right? Because you're just big enough that you just fire people, right? Or whatever.
Also,
right?
it's the portfolio effect. You know, it's like if you have a very small studio, you typically don't have tons of games, you don't have a lot of bandwidth. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same deal here is for a large studio, a tiny fraction of its cost goes into like managing platforms, right? Because a huge studio making 1 or 2 games, right? But if you're 100 tiny studios that add up to the same size as that big studio making 100 different games, all solving the same problem 100 times.
There's no economies of scale there. You know?
It's just stupid and bad.
Yeah.
But I will say, I mean, overall, this is very good news for Unity devs, right? Because you could cease to panic.
Yeah, you can figure out your exit strategy. You got time, and you can finish your current game. But yeah, I think long term, if I was working in Unity, I'd be looking for the eject button wherever I can. So otherwise, something kind of wild happened this week. Actually, kind of wild is an understatement. But Lex Friedman did an interview with Mark Zuckerberg this week. You can find it on YouTube, and they did it in VR using their Meta's headset
advisor thing.
whatever it's called. what's it called?
I have no idea.
It's that one
no
with the weird eyeballs too close together in the front of it. You know,
It used to be
little
Oculus
cameras.
as a brand. I don't know if they have
Yeah,
a new
now
name
it's
for
like
things.
Quest maybe or something. But in this interview, it starts off with Lex Friedman standing in this like white room,
Kind of
kind of
matrixy.
speaking, and then as he's talking about like, oh yeah, this following interview is me talking to Mark Zuckerberg. We're doing the interview in the metaverse. We're doing it in VR. Blah blah blah. And I thought that this was a video of him standing in a white room, and then at some point they switched the view and overlaid, and you could see the noise map on a 3D model, and it's a fucking 3D model. And I thought it was just a video of him, and then it turns out that this tech that Meta's been working on is this full body scanning tech, where essentially you got to like go to this facility and they'll scan you for like 3 hours. While you are reading things, emoting, making different gestures.
Very accessible
blah, blah, blah.
technology.
Yeah. So you got to do all this stuff, but what it does then is it encodes all these aspects of your avatar into this codec that Meta has developed that is super compressed and allows it to essentially like send all this hyper realistic details to the other person on the other side of this. Essentially, it's a video call where you're just like having a conversation with them.
But it's actually them. Like the facial expressions are on point. Like it wasn't uncanny.
It just looks like two people floating in a black void talking to each other.
It's fucking wild. Yeah, it's the first thing I've seen from Zuckerberg and that whole metaverse sphere of stuff. Where I'm like, that's actually cool shit. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and I know like we've been razzing on them for like, oh, they spent like $15 billion in like 4 years or whatever. Where I'm like, which again is still
I still don't understand.
mind-boggling.
It still seems like too much.
Yeah, but this is the first time where, like Sam was saying, you see this VR tech, and like in my mind, it's the first time I've ever seen somebody put on a VR headset and do something with it where I said to myself, that's cool as fuck. Like I could actually see myself doing this because they were in different states during the interview. And goddamn, it just looked like they were just sitting across the table from each other, just having a conversation, and they're able to make eye contact with each other.
That's the weird part. Yeah, think about that's one of those things in video calls where you can't actually look. You can never actually look at a camera because there's a camera, but looking at the camera is weird.
Yeah, but of course the way the VR stuff works is like this is what they're engineering for is to make it so that the eye contact actually works. Like when you're looking at somebody's eyes, like the camera picks up on that and it works, you know. And
it's
so
wild. It's really wild. I can't even. It's just fucking weird.
Yeah, and like if you're looking closely, you will notice that in some cases, some words or some like ways of mouth movements and stuff don't quite match up. Like if somebody is making an F sound, sometimes like the way that they're like, you know, like when somebody makes an F sound in real life, their teeth touch their lip, right? And it's kind of this like physical thing that's happening. But
it's definitely it's the dumbest looking of all the sounds you can make. I think it's
yeah. But when you do it in VR, then like sometimes like the teeth wouldn't actually touch the lip and stuff, and like so there's a very small number of very small little details that are still missing, but it's so far along that it doesn't matter at this point.
Well, we should also say that like these are always golden path demos, you know, even when they bring in somebody from the outside. So the tech is super impressive. And you're saying like there's a small number of things that are janky. I bet you anything there's a way more things that are janky, like which isn't to take away from how cool the golden path is and the fact that it works that well in this like really constrained, carefully constructed scenario, right? Is because that's always the first step to then it working in these broader scenarios. So it's very cool what it means for like what's next and like when it becomes available to people. And of course the problem of like it is at the end Meta and how many people want to give over your fucking body scan to Meta, you know?
I mean,
like,
no thanks. But also, it's the first time where I've seen, there's a bunch of sci-fi movies and stuff where it's like, oh, we got all the world leaders together talking about this
and the holodeck.
Yeah. And they're like, and everyone's like actually sort of phased in and then they leave or like kind of blip out. And it's like, you could literally do that with this. That's what I was thinking. I was like, that's cool shit. That's just so cool. But also, of course, you have the problem where like, someone's now wearing your body. It's not you. It's not real time scanning you, right? That's not what's happening. It's not using a video of you. It's not actually. It's just mapping it to what you're doing. So you could technically like wear Zuckerberg's body, right? So that's like
unless they've got some kind of hyper sophisticated like lockdown where like they do a face scan and then they map that to your avatar so that only
even if they do, as we discussed, all that shit gets cracked open in a second. Yep.
Yeah, they also won't because they do not give a shit if people impersonate other people.
That's fair. Yeah,
but that's the part that I was like, oh, it's the first very sci-fi and very cyberpunk thing I've seen.
Yeah. But as you noted, it also, we're on this road to the most horrifying deepfake landscape, like just conceivable.
We're already there, baby. Like it's.
We're already there, but the technology keeps getting, it's like the technology is accelerating at just how
far you can go,
do.
Yeah.
And there's a lag right now because it still largely isn't very accessible, right? Because like you said, this isn't available to the public yet. And even if it, like in the access to it, required a 3-hour body scan at a fancy facility designed for this purpose. So, right? Like, but this stuff is accelerating so fast. And again, it's already the case that if you are shown a video, the technology is already good enough and accessible enough that you already can't tell if it's real or not. We're already there. But the ability to just impersonate like anybody is still lagging a bit.
Just a tiny bit. But real time. That's the thing that was weird to me. It's like the real time aspect. Because it's one thing to have like, oh, here's a video. But it's like if you had an interview, if you do an interview with one of these things with like someone from, I don't know, like a news organization interviewing someone. The fact of the matter is that it could just literally not be that person live.
Well, I'm even thinking about even like weirder situations. So like ChatGPT this week, was it? Or OpenAI this week announced they're rolling out this new audio and like voice capability in ChatGPT, where essentially like you could just talk to it.
Yeah, I tried it. It's great,
and it just talks right back.
You can give it images. You give it images and be like, "Hey, I saw someone upload a whiteboard diagram of a program, like just like a typically poorly drawn whiteboard schematic, and it just fucking coded it based on the diagram. It's freaky.
So it can do the image recognition. You can have conversations with it, right? And it's like, all right, well, if you take all this stuff together, and of course, Meta is doing as much as they can to work on large language models and AI tech as well, right? And like you can guarantee that soon enough there will be a VR like person who's like your virtual assistant who you can see and it looks like you're in the same room as them and you can just have full on conversations with them.
Eye contact included, which is wild.
The fact is like all of the pieces to make that do exist now already. Yeah. Right.
They're just not particularly accessible. Right.
They're not that accessible and nobody's pulled them together like that yet, but they're all just there waiting around. It's like, that's kind of weird, but cool. But then the even weirder is like, did we talk about what Grimes did with Grimes AI? So Grimes, the singer, worked with this AI company to make an AI Grimes that you can like sing. She'll sing and like you give lyrics and music and stuff. And she basically said, I wanted to be able to be featured in an infinite number of other people's songs, but I don't have the time. Right. And so she's like, so I just made this AI model of my voice that anybody can use. And then I will just I just have a royalty agreement on it where I just get a cut of the royalties from whatever song. So she just basically open sourced herself, right? As like, as an artist. Then it's like, all right, well, what happens? Let's say you've got like a favorite podcaster or celebrity, whatever, right? Personality, somebody who you would normally never be able to actually like talk to, right?
What if you wanted to take all 435 hours of this show, right? You chunk it into one of these AI model buddies so that you could just at any point be like, instead of asking podcast questions, you can just ask.
You can just be part of the conversation.
The AI Coffee with Butterscotch crew and get this rambling bunch of nonsense. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but even weirder then is this kind of like we talked. I don't know if we talked in the past about the idea of parasocial relationship, right? Which is just like, it's the idea that there's this kind of asymmetry that happens where if you follow somebody who's a public figure, then you know like a million things about them and they don't really know anything about you, right? Like there's this super asymmetry there. it'll be even weirder in the near future when, let's say, there's like an AI Tom Cruise who you can just
You've been chatting with every morning over coffee.
every day at lunch. You can have lunch with Tom Cruise and just have weird conversations about aliens or whatever you want to talk to him about. But then if you actually did ever come across him in real life, he would have no fucking idea who you are, even though if to you it will feel like you've spent the last 5 years spending every lunch with him.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it goes beyond the current stuff, right? Because the parasocial stuff is already very interesting because of that, like you said, the information asymmetry. But it's one thing to sort of be like, it's almost like hanging out around someone is the current kind of parasocial vibe, right? You're not.
Yeah, you don't feel like you're interacting with them in like a tangible. Like you might kind of.
Again, it's an eye contact. You're not making eye contact. You're not back and forthing uniquely, right? But again, if you take that next step further, where it's like you actually are, then you meet the real person. I don't know. The whole thing's fucking wild. I don't know.
It feels like it would take that "don't meet your heroes" thing to like the next level because, you know, also like one of the things about AI is when you're talking to AI, it is like infinitely patient and you know all this stuff, and like so like I have to imagine.
Well, it doesn't have to be, right?
It doesn't have to be, yeah. Because like if they do some kind of a mapping of like a famous person and like develop a an AI personality profile, then maybe it would just act just like they would.
Well, you go talk to Mel Gibson, he'll start telling racist stuff to you, for example.
Yeah, like, get the fuck out of here! I'm working on my lines for my movie. Right? It's like, well, that was disappointing. I didn't. That's the conversation I wanted to have. But yeah, I mean, just this idea that we could essentially go through like the writings of and information about historical figures and whatever, and like recreate them in. Of course, like it wouldn't actually be a true recreation, but we wouldn't have any way of knowing, right? Because if we just get all the information we have about somebody, everything they've ever said and written and whatever, and like make a replica of that person that you can then just sit down and chat with.
It's a replica of the public facade of the person.
The public, yeah.
But I think all this is like really, it's interesting. It's just like interesting. Like, what does this mean? But I think for me, it's mostly horrifying.
It's uncomfortable.
Well, it's not like that's uncomfortable. I think it's really bad that this technology is not just coming, but already is possible, right? Because the fact is, there's nothing stopping anybody right now today from putting together an AI model of my voice, right? And then just making things that that seem to be me saying stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And whether or not that stuff is good or bad, the fact that it could be bad is like the biggest part of that problem, right? But the fact that it just isn't stuff that I said, right? And they can just start putting that forth, right? They can go anywhere. Like it can appear in anything. It can appear in suddenly there could be a viral TikTok of this unknown person, Adam Coster, saying this horrible thing. Like, what the fuck is this? So that somebody can make some content out of it, right? And then all of a sudden I'm on the news. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't say any of this. And they're like, well, this sounds like you though, right? Like
I'm in a different camp on this because I'm thinking about like, let's say you've got an elderly family member who.
No, I'm not saying there isn't good stuff you can do. I'm saying I don't even care about the good stuff because the bad stuff is going to be happening. There's going to be so much of the bad stuff is going to be happening. It's going to destroy people's lives on an impressive level we've never seen before. But
I mean, the thing is, all of this is already possible and it's not really happening, right? Like.
That's because it's not easy enough yet.
It's pretty fucking easy.
It's not easy enough yet because in order for this stuff to happen at scale, it's got to be easy enough, right? Yeah, but the thing is, like, a lot of this is happening in this like behind the scenes way, right? Where, because like for example, one of the things I've been seeing pop up on my TikTok, where because they always show you like, oh, here's the 0 views thing we want to get some eyeballs on, right? Is like repeatedly recently, I've been getting these like weird AI made videos of like that are like the whole thing is very fake, right? But it's an advertisement for a website where you can post anybody's pictures and it takes their clothes off for you, right? Ooh, that's happening. That's a real thing that exists right now, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this is I don't buy this argument that like that we shouldn't push the tech because it can be used.
I'm not saying we shouldn't push the tech. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the fact that we're doing it without any like, are there any legal ramifications right now? If somebody just goes and rips my voice out of this thing and makes a fake me and then makes it say a bunch of stuff, nope. Is that even illegal?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
How? I mean, how
is it? it would be probably go under defamation.
Depends on what if it didn't say anything bad, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the
No,
tricky
then it
bit.
doesn't
Is,
matter.
like, you have this gap, right? Where because of the accelerating speed with which you can you're starting to be able to just do anything, right? Not just, again, I think Adam's point is not just to public figures, which is a different kind of thing, but just to
which is still not great, but it's anybody. Yeah, you could anybody.
and how
I think anything that's sufficiently impactful is, it's gonna have multiple sides to it. Like I think about I love the fact that when I got my wisdom teeth out, they gave me some painkillers to go along with it. Mm-hmm. Had they said, well, we could develop, the tech to make you not suffer for the next week, but if we did that, then some number of people would have their lives ruined because they would become addicted to it. So you're gonna have to just fucking.
But I think Adam's point is that that's not where he's coming from. His point is that on the back end more so that you have.
Yeah, that's why we have regulations around.
Yeah, you have some companies who just sort of just pushing those and prescribing those so fucking hard that you create an opioid epidemic, right? It's more so that side of it.
This is
because I feel like that's where all this tech is right now. Is it's basically what was the company that did OxyContin that basically completely destroyed the
I remember
middle class America with the opioid crisis, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because to take your example into that realm, I think that's actually where we are. I think the tech is the equivalent of every tech company being that company, as in. There are no regulations. There's no safeguards. Nobody's actually all anybody cares about is how do we get this tech developed fast and pushed out, right? And
but that's just the human nature side of it. Like to me, it's not a tech problem. It's a regulation problem, which sounds like what you're describing.
No, it's both because the tech people could be regulating themselves at the same time, right?
But you can't.
But they can't because of competition. Yeah. Like you need a third party to come in.
Like you're saying, can't, and all I'm saying is won't, right? Because it's not that they. Well,
no, they can't. In the same way that if somebody makes a game in Unity and then they would be subject to these developer fees, they can't publish it because they're fucked if they do, right? Like if you're a company, if you're open AI and you say, wow, this tech has moved far enough, we should stop and wait for regulations to come in. Nobody else is going to stop.
Oh, no, I'm not saying they should stop. I'm saying part of the process of building this stuff should include the process of figuring out what are the ethical implications, what are the safeguards, and how do we do this? And these same fucking companies, which would actually be good for them anyway, and actually it's like Sam Friedman, whatever his name is, tried to do, right, where he was like, the guy who's doing the OpenAI.
Sam Altman.
Sam Altman. Yeah. There's so many combinations of these names. He actually tried to do where he was like, hey, we should pump but his strategy was like, hey, we should pump the brakes while we're ahead. So it was like this transparent bullshit kind of a thing, right? But it also would have been in his best interest if he had actually gone and said to Congress, hey, let's put them laws in place because we can't actually stop ourselves.
He did do that. A bunch of times, but they just didn't,
Well,
I think it's like,
they're busy trying to shut down the government and fabricate.
It's all too slow. It's all too slow to keep up. And I think that's the point is that it's all coming, but also a lot of these capabilities have already been present in just slightly different ways or requiring slightly more expertise. So the whole example of send me a picture and I'll take the clothes off. You can do that. You can fake it. It's fake. So you can do the same thing with Photoshop. It's not like it has fucking X-ray vision and it's like, here's the body that's actually in there. No, it's just filling it in, right? It's in painting, right?
Well, no, but it doesn't matter whether it's the real body. That's not the problem. The problem is that now
it removes the skill barrier. The
problem is now there is porn of you on the internet and people won't know.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's been a problem since Photoshop is available. I'm saying it is a problem already, right?
Yeah, it just is now a problem at scale, as in
yes, the scale's easier.
And so I think the fact that all these things were technically possible or have been happening or whatever are not.
You're saying true, but scale is.
It's true, but it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, because it's scale, and the thing that's at stake here is and the fact is like the three of us would be fine because it would be easy for us to point at hey, we have a public podcast. Everything we've actually said is in it, right? Here's the videos that go into our public channel. Everything we say is actually in it, right? And we're three well-off white dudes, right? So we'll be given every benefit of the doubt. If somebody comes out and says, look at this thing that these people did or whatever, right? We'll very likely be able to recover and it won't be a big deal. But that's not true for a huge fraction of people, right? And we're going to start seeing these kinds of stories of people who are like, oh, I was trying to get a job, but then my potential employers did some Google searches and found all of this horrible stuff that they thought was me, right? Or even not horrible stuff, because like sex work shouldn't be a problem, right? But people see it as a problem. And so
It's just stuff that would fit with whatever you're trying to do.
yes. Right? And so if somebody goes and finds a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't even you, right? They can't tell the difference, and then that's that, right?
But I think mainly, is what we're getting to very rapidly. It's a slightly different outcome, which I think is simply that I know where I've been too. I think similarly, it's like the amount of trust I have in anything that I see on the internet has been
it's zero, yeah.
in like 2010 or so. It felt like it was pretty. I was like, oh wow, that's a thing. That's definitely a thing that happened. And then through the 2010s, the end of the 2010s, basically getting to a point where like most of this feels like it's engineered.
Yeah, as people figured out like astroturfing and making bot farms to manipulate public sentiment, or even just that like
but now it's getting to a point where it's like it's not even just that it's like essentially tweets or whatever sentiment, like this broad idea of like 1,000 random people saying something that might be fake, but rather it's a whole different kind, which is like that what seems like a very real photo or a very real video or a very real piece of speech is maybe not. And I think largely what it feels like we're moving to is the point where you actually just have a severe amount of distrust from, or you actually should.
Well,
when it comes
and that
to
would be, the problem is that we still don't yet. So the damage can.
Yeah, it's going to be my guess is like the next 5-10 years is going to be this like intense erosion of
and there's going to be
trust in it.
But in order to actually get to the point where people don't trust it, damage has to be done, right?
Yeah,
And so
more
what I'm
damage.
saying is
More.
well, enough that it actually impacts enough people who otherwise wouldn't be suspicious, right? There needs to be enough stories that people broadly distrust it, not just distrust it in sort of segments, right? And so in order for us to get to that scale, the amount of human suffering and damage has to be created to get us to the point where it doesn't create that damage anymore, right? Is just astronomical. And
I don't think that'll even happen. Not because of optimism, but because so much of what a lot of this tech is capable of is creating pockets and bubbles of misinformation, echo chambers.
Yep.
So like even if a bunch of bad things have happened to you, there's a good chance that you are in a echo chamber that is redirecting your anger about those things towards some completely unrelated third party that is not responsible for any of the bad things that happened to you, right? So like if you're suffering economically or something because of automation, essentially making your industry obsolete, but you just happen to be in an echo chamber that is redirecting your anger toward immigrants, then like you have no opinions about robots, but you're real mad about people coming over the border, right? It's like it's just so easy to manipulate people that I don't know if the damage being done will actually correlate to the response.
It may not, and that's
damage,
even worse, right? And because I think it's also like even outside of the sheer scale, like the breadth of like how many people can be damaged by this stuff, I think it's also the depth to which a single person can have their life just absolutely destroyed is also increasing. Because the degree to which you can, like the extent to which you can create fake stuff and false narratives, right, that seem extremely real, just is
Well, they could
growing.
take off the consequences first, and then because there's essentially it's rapidity and response that's required nowadays too. You see this a lot with typically like viral things that then get someone fired or whatever else.
Yeah, the damage is just already done.
Yeah, and then with some frequency, actually, you'll see that it was not entirely accurate.
the whole story.
So it's like, oh shit.
But also, like our legal system still our legal system sucks in an infinite number of ways, right? But the thing that it sucks at the worst, which is really embarrassing, is evaluation of evidence, right? It's not a truth finding apparatus, right? It's a punishment apparatus. And it already is the case that like most of the stuff that we submit as evidence is already suspicious and not very good evidence from the start, but it's evaluated as if it's true, right? And the now capability to generate and fabricate extremely believable evidence that would basically be used in court because the same.
I think it doesn't matter. I think the court is irrelevant because I think it's like the court of public opinion is where the actual problem is because you can't.
It's a two-parter. They both are big problems, right? Because the court of public opinion can like fuck up your life really quickly. That's true. But not to the same extent that the state can fuck up your life.
I mean, I think my point is they both can. And at least in the state's context, you have a way of supposedly of putting in evidence, kicking out evidence, whatever.
But that's the thing is,
And then you can take
but my
stuff back.
point is you don't actually though, because the way that the
Well,
state
you at
apparatus
least have
works,
some artifice for it, for fuck's sake. Like, you don't have any of that in the, like, on
I would
Twitter.
actually argue that you have more power in the public space than you do against the state to actually, because you could develop counter narratives and put them out and all that kind of stuff. You know?
Yeah, but I would totally disagree with that, because like you see this with people getting their shit just totally destroyed for something that they didn't actually do in like the public sphere.
Yeah,
And who's
a lot
held
of it's like
accountable?
just
Who do you go
identity
to? No
theft.
one, because there's 7,000 people who did a thing, and you can't hold anybody accountable. Versus
There's no
justice
class
system,
action.
you got appeals, you got whatever else.
there's a difference between accountability and recovery, because I'm talking about in a falsely accused case, right? Can you recover from being falsely accused by 7,000 randos on the internet, right? And the answer is most of the time, yes, you can, at least to enough of an extent. It might mean you have to leave like that, whatever that space is, who knows, right? But you which isn't to say,
I don't know. I think it's all
damage, right?
to me. It's all the same shit. I don't know if we're splitting.
To me, there's a big difference between being in jail and people not liking me on the internet.
That's
even
the
getting
problem. That's not
fired,
what
you
I'm talking to you about. I'm talking about the other part, which is a big difference between being in jail with a lawyer with appeals court's options versus, say, having constant death threats, having to move your home, people finding you, doxing you all the time, like never being able to get a job in the industry that you've chosen. Like that, all that stuff is.
They both suck.
They both suck. I don't see any reason to be
sure.
like.
I think it's
one is
maybe
worse.
you have more confidence in our justice system actually providing any form of justice, which I actually
No, I don't. What I'm saying is simply that there's systems in place for attempting to, say, push back against.
Yeah, I'm just saying it doesn't matter if the systems are so broken that they don't actually accomplish that, which is all to say, we're not even disagreeing, because I'm saying all of these things are bad. But the thing that I'm personally worried about the most, because the thing that can actually realistically do damage to me with all this stuff is like somebody fakes a bunch of things that cause me to get into legal trouble, and then the legal system believes those things or uses them against me, right, for some reason, right? Because the ability of the state to now punish people, and especially like as we move into a fascist regime, because people are trying to make that happen, right? The ability of the state to use the same public opinion stuff, but to influence things so that they can then use the arm of like the power of the state to destroy you.
Yeah, but
is
you're going
increasing
a bit
at the
far.
same time.
You're
It's
going
all the
very,
same.
very far. That's like way too fucking far, right? Because like the reality is like you can't just submit a fucking voice recording that is challenged as like an AI thing into a court as admissible evidence.
Oh, you could, because you have to prove that that wasn't you that said it.
You have to prove the opposite, right?
No, they don't. Like you don't actually get. Because I mean, you can make the argument, but it's on the judge to decide.
Adam, I get where you're going.
Is that actually real?
I get where you're going, but I think
because the
you're
other part
painting
of
such
this
a
is now,
dystopian future with this that it's like it's not accurate, right? I get what you're saying as far as like the extreme on the extreme on the extreme, right? You're taking the extreme case of the justice system failing every time. You take an extreme case of a fascist state.
I'm not saying everyone every time. I'm saying all of this stuff is going to happen to individual people.
It's going to happen.
Oh, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm there with you on that.
The depth so that's what I talk about, the depth to which this stuff can now fuck an individual person is going to be just so enormous, right? More powerful than it's ever been. And because of the accessibility, the breadth is going to grow. I'm not saying like literally everybody's going to be falsely imprisoned, et cetera. Like, not at all. We already have like little microcosms of little fascist towns and states and so on that are already throwing people in jail because they want to, right? We already have that. The legal system's already so broken that those people are mostly stuck. But like you said, there are mechanisms that they can get out to higher levels that maybe can save them, right? But if the evidence against them is so well manufactured, right, then it doesn't even, like, they can't even escape that if they could have in the first place, right?
Well, yeah, I think if I were to kind of like summarize the fears and the optimism, I think it's that just like the internet was an amplifier for things that were already happening. Yeah. AI is yet another amplifier on top of the amplifier. So like,
it feels like, I guess the point is, it feels like the previous one has, especially in recent years, gotten out of control in one particular kind of amplification, right? Which is the negativity, the rage, the whatever.
The
right?
echo chamber thing. Yeah.
Well,
if you put
what the internet did is it made it so that, because it exacerbated stuff because it made the flow of information so easy, right? But what AI does is it makes the
generation of information,
the ability to fabricate information go up, right? So that's a different, like it's the pairing of those two things together.
Yeah, I get where you're going. I see where you're going.
It changes the scale of everything.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
It is true that I am sort of doomsdaying here, but I do honestly, I honestly believe that these things are going to be happening. I just don't necessarily think
I don't disagree.
they're going to be happening like at scale, right?
But here's the thing. We're all forgetting about the most important victims of the AI future.
Shareholders.
Which is people with an atypical number of fingers. Because nobody will ever believe that any picture of them is actually a real picture ever again.
That's true.
You know?
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got the opposite problem, which isn't that somebody's fabricating things about them. It's that nobody believes their true life actually happened because they have 6 fingers, you know?
Yep.
Well, you won't be able to
Like a
believe
weird bet
anything.
one, you know?
Yeah. Although actually, probably at some point there'll be a rule in place then, because like the way that that they fix these AIs is they like learn what a finger is, then you put in a rule. It's like you can only have 5 of these or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So probably if you've got anything different than the average of anything, you just won't be able to.
Then
be
you're
represented.
safe.
You're actually safer that way, I think, because it's easier to tell.
Well, here's the big question for you at the end of the podcast, which is this where blockchain becomes useful?
Certainly. This is the time.
Is this finally the moment?
No, but it will be the case that being able to prove your identity and
That's what I mean.
And authenticate a piece. The problem is blockchain doesn't help with that. As a
kind of
total,
tries.
it's unrelated to that because what blockchain does, it proves that you hold on to something, right? Actually, that's not even true. It proves that
claims that you do.
It proves that a wallet holds on to something, and if you can, but you can't prove that you hold on to the wallet, so it actually doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So we already have a system for that. It's called a password, right? Is the fact that your brain.
Yeah, I was just trying to throw a bone to those tech bros.
No,
who are
they
still
don't. They
holding
can't
on.
have any bones.
Blockchain bros have been chewing on that one bone they got thrown in from 2009 for like
Hey,
13,
NFTs,
14 years.
NFTs made a pretty good amount of money, and now it's worth nothing. But you know,
Yeah. But that's going to be
totally
the interesting next wave of technology, though, is going to be identification proof. It's going to be like, because there's already a lot of stuff going on. There's always has been a lot of stuff going on towards that, but it's going to become so important that I think that's going to be kind of the next, the new like major industry that gets created by all this AI stuff is going to be how do you authenticate stuff, right? Yep. And that's going to be
what is real?
Yeah, and like it actually is going to be easier to do that with things like images and video and stuff because there are way more ways to embed information and stuff, but that's going to be basically impossible with text. So it's going to be interesting and bad and good.
It's going to be everything amplified times.
Well, it's going to be like, that's the thing is, yeah, it's going to be really bad and really good and really interesting. And like, we're going to see that whole fucking picture.
And really boring sometimes too.
We'll just call it
because it's going to be really everything.
It's going to be a lot.
Everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah,
as they say.
That's accurate.
Well, something to think about for next week. And that's all the time we have. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And as always, we would like to invite you to head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list if you haven't done so already. It helps give us some algorithmic exposure for the game and gets more visibility, and it helps us out a ton. So please head on over there and do that if you haven't. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.